Hi, I'm Rohit, and this is the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam is a part of the ancient Vedas. And now you might wonder, why am I talking about something that is ancient, and why the Vedas? What's the big importance of this whole thing, and why am I doing this regularly? That's a valid question. The reason I talk about the Vedas is because they talk about a civilization that existed tens of thousands of years ago. Okay, so what's the big deal about that? It was a highly advanced spiritual culture that we can learn a lot from. The Vedas were written around 3000 BC, and they are spiritual histories of the world that we live in today. And when I say spiritual histories, it's because they were presented by, or rather recorded by, highly advanced spiritual gurus and masters and evolved beings who looked at humanity from a very different lens than a normal historian would do. So the Vedas were written around 3000 BC, and they focus on the spiritual lessons of man's folly. This Veda that we're talking about is the Bhagavatam, or the Bhagavad Purana, and it talks about the best and worst of humanity and how one can lead to another, how the light inspires the darkness and the darkness inspires light. All of us have free will, and we must choose. This is a history about where we've been, and in contrast to that, we get to see where we are now. So there are two main topics we're going to talk about here. The first topic today is about a world war that happened in 3000 BC. It was called the Battle of Kurukshetra. It was a war of dharma, meaning a time when there was so much evil in the world, kind of what we had during the time of Hitler, and that had to be wiped out. There was a rise of adharma, the opposite of dharma. And just like in World War that happened, in the early 1900s, where we saw the World War II, 85 million people died. And in World War I, 40 million people died. That's 125 million people. It was tragic. It was horrible. And we resolved for that never to happen again. And we're once again back in that kind of situation today, where the world is in turmoil once again. And that's at an international level. But back then, in this battle of Kurukshetra in India, 640 million warriors died within 18 days. That's twice the population of the US. Twice the population in 18 days. Or the entire population of a country like Canada or Afghanistan or Iraq every single day for 18 days. It was a civil war that went international. So imagine the civil war in America, North and South. It was that kind of civil war, but it was between two families, and it went international. And warriors came from all over the planet. Now we think that, there was nothing going on everywhere, but that's our own arrogance, that we think that this planet had just aboriginal tribes, and finally now we've advanced and become so highly sophisticated with our technologies. Utter, absolute nonsense. The records show that there were highly advanced civilizations on this planet. If we're not able to find the remains of that, that's because we're not even looking for them. So let's move on to the second topic. The second topic we're going to cover today is about a great yogi. At the end of the war, one of the greatest warriors, Bhishma, lay dying on a bed of arrows. A bed of arrows, yes. We think of yoga as some postures or meditation, but Bhishma was a practical yogi, a karma yogi, a powerful warrior, a man of his word. It was unwavering in his devotion to God, an ideal man. As a yogi, he was going to choose the most auspicious time for his death. He would choose what to meditate on, what mantras to utter, and what thoughts to think. Why would he do this? I'm going to explain that later. But for now, let's get started. Let's begin by talking about cowards. So, the battle had got over, Dharma was established, the evil forces on the world were eradicated, but at what cost? Massive massacre of human life, and everybody that remained was left in shock and grief. Now, after the battle, there was a last-ditch effort, and I spoke about this the last time around. Ashwatthama, the son of the guru Drona, made a last-ditch cowardly effort and killed the 5 sleeping sons of Draupadi. This was an absolutely cowardly act. Like no warrior would do such a thing. To kill children, for one thing, and to kill them while they're sleeping on top of that. But they were the 5 that would have inherited the kingdom. And he wanted to wipe them out. So of course, when the father, Arjun, got to know that his sons had been killed, he chased Ashwatthama. But Ashwatthama, knowing that he was cornered and could not escape the wrath of Arjun, he fired the ultimate weapon called the Bhramastra, which is a nuclear weapon. And it would have destroyed the entire planet. However, Arjun neutralized it with another Bhramastra. Now, this is similar to what we see happening with the launch of ICBMs, or intercontinental ballistic missiles. And now they've created ways in which to counter such missiles. So let's say a country like Russia fired such a missile on America. America has satellites in space, or which either have lasers or missiles that can intercept and destroy that ICBM. Now, what they were doing in those days, however, was they didn't have these big, huge missiles and didn't use satellites. They used yogic powers, they used mantras, and they fired these weapons through arrows. In today's time, you might think that's ridiculous. Such a thing cannot be done. However, this was a civilization that developed a different technology. A technology that was not based on material things and objects and big, huge monstrosities of missiles. They used them through the power of the mind, the power of spirit, the power of benedictions that could be received through meditation. This was a time of yogis. This was a time where people developed siddhis, or great powers, based on their tapasya, their austerities, their meditations, their deep trance, in which they were able to cultivate aspects of the human capability that are unknown to humanity today. So, what happened next is this, that Ashwatthama was caught, right? His weapon was neutralized, he was caught, he was shamed, and they wanted to kill him, but the kindness and compassion of the women, Kunti and others, because Ashwatthama's father had been the guru of that family, and he had taught them everything they know, they said, no, let him go. And so he was released. But you know, when a tiger is wounded, he becomes a man-eater. And so something similar happened with Ashwatthama. I'll come to that in just a minute. So around this time, Krishna, who had been the chariot driver of Arjun, and who had spoken the Bhagavad Gita to him, and who was in himself a very powerful king, and was known by many to be the supreme being incarnated on this planet, Krishna, who was so dear to everyone at that time and had helped them so much in winning this victory, was getting ready to leave. He was on his chariot, and everyone was sad and saying their goodbyes. And Kunti, Queen Kunti, was saying these beautiful prayers in which she said, Krishna, I wish that all these calamities that have happened would happen to us again and again, so that we would see you again and again. For seeing you means we will no longer see repeated births and deaths. Now, the fact of the matter is that most of us as human beings don't turn to God unless there is a calamity, unless there is a problem. When the times are good, we're happy in ourselves, we're enjoying, we're having a wonderful time. But when things get tough, we turn to God. God, help me, my child, my family, my wealth, my whatever is in trouble, and I need your help, and none my efforts are failing. Unfortunately, that's when we turn to God. And true devotees of God, true lovers of God, they turn to God all the time. They don't wait for times of calamity. But it is the human instinct to do that. So Kunti is saying, well, since that's the only way we seem to turn to you, may those calamities come upon us again and again. Because when they come to us, we remember you. And when we remember you, we no longer need to come back into the cycle of birth and death. It's a powerful thing to understand that remembering the divine, remembering God, in whichever way you know God, uplifts you, frees you, liberates you from the cycle of birth and death. No, it doesn't mean one time remembering. It doesn't mean just remembering you in the time of trouble, but it's about remembering always. And we'll get to see in a little while why that always is so important, because it is a sadhana, a practice, an abhyas that leads us to come to the point where we will remember God even at the time of death. And as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, that wherever your consciousness is fixed at the time of leaving this body, to that state you will go. And if you are fixed on God, you will go to God. And if your consciousness is fixed upon the things of the world, then you will come back to this world again, because those are unresolved karmic things that you are thinking about. You've heard about it. When people die, they say that they remember their entire life. That's right. That remembrance is going to be what brings you back here to deal with the unresolved issues. But if you have resolved things, and if your mind is focused on the Supreme Being or God, or whichever way you understand God, then that is where you will go. All right, so let's get back to our story. And of course, these are not just stories, they are not just mythologies. That's what the Western people that came to India wanted everyone to believe, and brainwashed people in that country to think that, oh, this is just mythology. But the fact of the matter is, these were itihasa. It means itihasya. This is how it happened. These were Puranas, these were histories written by highly evolved beings. So let's keep that in mind. So they're describing now the incidents that occurred at that time from a spiritual perspective. All right. After the battle, Ashwatthama, who was the son of Guru Drona, made one more effort. So he's not going to give up, right? What he did was this. As he fled again, now they had released him, but like that wounded tiger, he fled and he fired another Bhramastra. Now, who was this aimed at? It was aimed at the womb of Uttara, the wife of Arjun. The wife of Abhimanyu, I'm sorry, not the wife of Arjun, the wife of Arjun's son, Abhimanyu. Uttara had a baby in her womb. Her husband was dead, Abhimanyu. He had been killed in the battle. But this now was the final and last descendant of the Pandavas. And Abhimanyu wanted to kill him. He fired a Bhramastra that was so precise that it would kill just the child, the baby, and not even the mother. Such a powerful weapon in such a focused way. It was a nuclear weapon. It would have destroyed her womb. She would never have been able to have another child. Uttara came running to Krishna. Please protect me, she said. Protect me, for there is no one else who can save me from the clutches of death. You, my dear Krishna, are all-powerful. A fiery iron arrow, the Bhramastra, is coming toward me fast. My dear Lord, let it burn me personally if you so desire, but please do not let it burn and abort my embryo. In her womb was the only last descendant of the Pandavas. So the Pandavas, the 5 brothers, picked up their weapons to try and destroy this Bhramastra. Before we go on, this is the scene as it looked like as she's calling on Krishna to help her. So, here it is, the Bhramastra coming to attack her, coming to kill her child. And she's calling on Krishna, and Krishna now picks up his weapon, the Sudarshan Chakra, a disc that was said to be so powerful it could destroy even the most powerful of weapons. No one could avoid that disc of Krishna, his Sudarshan Chakra. And with that, with his energy, he covered the embryo of Uttara with his personal energy. And although the Bhramastra was undefeatable, it was neutralized and foiled when confronted by the strength of Vishnu, Krishna. And that's kind of what it looked like. This is what happened within the womb. Krishna became tiny and protected her womb. And it is said in the Bhagavatam, do not think this to be especially wonderful in the activities of the mysterious and infallible Sri Krishna. By his own transcendental energy, he creates, maintains, and annihilates all material things, although he himself is unborn. And there is another saying that goes, Mare Krishna Rakhe ke, Rakhe Krishna Mare ke, means who Krishna wants to protect, no one can destroy, and who he wants to kill, no one can protect. So the devotees know this. They know this science, that God is the only and the ultimate protector from all worldly problems. There is nothing that can harm you when you have the protection of God. This was something that was also understood by Draupadi. Draupadi, during the Chirharan, she was being attacked in the assembly in front of everyone, and they were taking off her clothes, trying to strip her in front of the entire, like think of the parliament, right? And Congress, and bringing her into there, and then taking off her clothes in public in front of all the rulers of the world at that time. And Krishna, who you'll see on the top right, was protecting her. He was sending her unlimited amounts of fabric so that no one could take off her garment. In this way, when Draupadi knew that nobody could help her, she had reached out her arms, and Krishna had saved and protected her. And the same thing happened with Uttara here. And the same has happened with devotees all over since the beginning of time, that he has always been there, protecting them, helping them, guiding them. God is there with us. We are not alone in this world. And that is the reason for having a relationship with God, to know that we are taken care of, we are safe, because that's ultimately what we worry about. But that is proven again and again and again. In my own life, I've seen so many times where that happened, where I was in dire distress, and I said, look, I just leave it to you. If you want this to happen, so be it. And if you want the opposite to happen, I leave it in your hands. I surrender unto you, my dear Lord, my dear Krishna, my dear Govinda. So now let's talk about, we talked about cowards, now let's talk about heroes. And the hero we're going to speak about today is Bhishma. So as I told you, so all these people had died, the funeral rites took place, the Pandavas and everyone gathered. Krishna was about to leave, and then it came to be known that Bhishma was still lying on the battlefield, and so all of them went there. Bhishma, the great hero, the great yogi, the great warrior, the grandfather of the Pandavas, was lying on a bed of arrows. And all the rishis, the great saintly people, along with their disciples, had assembled there. And Bhishma, even though he was in great pain due to the discomfort of all those arrows that has pierced his body, was welcoming them. He was able to transcend that pain, and he was blessed to leave his body at will. Now as Krishna came before him, even Krishna bowed down, because he is here playing his Leela, and he sat down by Bhishma's side. Now who is this Bhishma? Let's talk about that for a minute. Bhishma was one of the Vasus who were demigods who lived in the heavenly kingdoms. There were 8 brothers, and they had offended the great sage Vasishta, who had cursed them to be born as humans. They didn't like that. They didn't want to be born as humans. My goodness, they had all kinds of wonderful bodies and wonderful pleasures in the heavenly kingdoms. And by the way, the idea of heaven is not the same in the Vedas as it is in the Abrahamic religions. That, what they refer to, is the kingdom of God, or Vaikuntha, or Brahmajyoti, the light. Within that light are the planets of the divine, the spiritual world, which is beyond the cycle of birth and death, beyond the material world. But this is the heavenly planets that exist in the material world, where people have much longer lives and do not suffer near as much as we do out here. Of course, ultimately everyone suffers birth and death, but yeah. All right, so now these 8 brothers who had been cursed, they pleaded with goddess Ganga to be their mother and save them from the earth. Ganga flows through the earth. She is the Ganges River. And so she came incarnated to the earth and met with the king Shantanu. And she had the king promise that he would let her do whatever she wanted. And the king was so besotted with her, you're like, "Oh, I'll do whatever you say." But he had no idea what was in store for him. Now, they had children, the king and Ganga. And as each child was born, she would go and she would drown it. 8 children, and one by one, she drowned all 7 of them first. As she was going to drown the 8th one, Shantanu, the king, stopped her. He says, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this? I know I've promised you I would not say anything, but I mean, this has gone too far. This is too much. I cannot believe that you've been doing this." Now, this wasn't because she had postpartum depression or something like that. No. What was actually happening was that she had made a vow to these Vasus who had been cursed to take birth as human beings. And she had said, "Look, I will shorten your stay on earth. I will be there and I will kill you right after you are born." So that's why she was doing it. But on the other hand, this 8th child, because now her husband had stopped her, she decided she was going to leave him. He had broken his promise to her. And so she departed for the heavenly planets, taking her son with her. Of course, the king was devastated as she left. And he went about ruling his kingdom, but very, very sad. 16 years passed. And meanwhile, Ganga had made sure that he was trained and ready to take on his role. And she came back to the earth and handed him over to the king, and then once again left the king. This boy who she handed over was now, a young warrior. He was blessed with incredible strength and wisdom. He was known in his later part of his life as a Mahajan, or a great soul, or a Bhramarishi. That is, in other words, a very highly evolved, saintly person. But at the same time, he was this warrior. So like you had the best of both worlds, right? He was known as Devavrat at that time, and later on acquired the title of Bhishma. Now I'll tell you how he got that. Devavrat was, of course, the eldest son of the king, and therefore the most worthy heir to the throne. But something happened. The king fell in love with another woman. This was a fisherwoman, Satyavati, whose father wouldn't let her marry the king because he said that her progeny would not rule the kingdom. The king already had a son, Bhishma, who was then Devavrat, and he was the one who was going to be the king. And the father said, "No way, you're not going to marry the king." Now, Devavrat, Bhishma, for his father's happiness, seeing his father sad and morose and moping around, for his father's happiness, he decided to renounce his claim to the throne. He went over to the father of the lady that his dad was in love with and said, "Look, I will renounce my claim to the throne. The father said, but you know what? Even then, you might get married. You might have children. Those children will then inherit the throne. And so he said, all right, I will never marry either, and I will never have any children. So I will renounce the throne myself, and I will never marry, and therefore never have any children. And he took an oath, a solemn oath. And it is because of that terrible oath that he is called Bhishma. And this is that scene. So Bhishma's father was deeply moved by the sacrifice and blessed him, because he cared so much about his father. He loved his father. He didn't want to see his father unhappy, and his father blessed him. He said to him, as long as you live, you will not die. In other words, as long as you want to live, you will not die. Death will come to you only when you want, with your permission. And the power of the people in these times was such that when they uttered some words, those words came true. And this came from their practice of yoga and of meditation and their austerities and their penances and their ability to develop themselves to such a high level of consciousness that when they said something, it would happen. Shortly after that, the king died, and the two of his sons that he had with the fisherwoman Satyavati, his wife, the queen, both of them died one after the other as well. So the kingdom now was in an utter mess. Bhishma had taken a vow of celibacy. The two sons of Satyavati, the queen mother, had died. And it looked like the entire kingdom would fall apart. Now, there's a lot of detail to this whole thing, and I'm not going to get into it. It's a fascinating story. You must read the Mahabharata, Maha, M-A-H-A, Bharat, B-H-A-R-A-T-A. Read the Mahabharata. It's a fascinating read. I've absolutely loved it. And in the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita. Now, in my series, the Bhagavad Gita course that I did online, which you'll find on YouTube, if you go to chapter 0, you'll get to learn more about what happened. A little summary of the Mahabharata if you want to get a sort of idea. And if you want to know more about the family tree or chart of this entire complex arrangement of what happened in this family, I have put together something here that you can take a look at as well. So if you like, take a screenshot of that, and then you can understand it more deeply. I won't get into it now. All right. So what Satyavati, the queen mother, did was she called on her illegitimate son Vyas, who she'd had with Parashara Muni before she got married. And this Vyas was the one who actually wrote down all the Vedas. He was a highly evolved being. And she called on him to impregnate the two wives of her dead son. One of those wives bore the son called Dhritarashtra, who was blind. It became the blind king, the father of the Duryodhan and all the other Kauravas. The other wife gave birth to Pandu, the father of the 5 Pandavas, who became the winners of this battle. And of course, these two brothers, Dhritarashtra and Pandu, and their children thereafter, were the cause of the great war. And now Bhishma, their grandfather, was dying on the battlefield on a bed of arrows. I know the story keeps going back in circular motion, but let me explain it further. This is Bhishma in action when he was on the battlefield just before getting killed. And this is Bhishma lying on the bed of arrows. And this is where Bhishma is now surrounded by all his relatives, the Pandavas, and Krishna, who is sitting there as well. And he's speaking to all of them. Now, Bhishma asks Krishna a question. He says, why has this happened to me? I can remember 100 births of mine. That is how evolved he was. He didn't need to go to a past life regression therapist. He didn't need to do anything. He could remember 100 past lives. And he says, in those 100 past lives that I can remember, I did no bad karma. So why am I suffering this now? Krishna reminded him, he says, you can remember 100 of your births, but in the 101st birth, there was something that you did. You were a prince, and you were very fond of hunting. And you once killed a creature, shot him with your arrow, and this creature fell on a bush of thorns and suffered in that condition for 58 days. During that time, it wished for Bhishma to suffer as it had. Now, due to his good deeds, Bhishma had not suffered the effects of this karma. But when he failed to stop the abuse of Draupadi, remember the lady who was being stripped in front of the entire Congress or the assembly of kings and warriors? Yeah, when he failed to stop the abuse, he was the grandfather of that family. He had the power. He could have done it, but he failed to stop the abuse of Draupadi. At that time, the benefits of his good karma were lost. And then, when it came down to the battle of Kurukshetra, which lasted 18 days, but on the 10th day, the undefeatable Bhishma was defeated by Arjuna with the help of Krishna. Hundreds of arrows pierced his body, which as he fell became a bed of arrows where he stayed for 58 days. Now, as I was saying earlier, the Pandavas, his family, had gathered around him. They were sad and seeing them all grieving. Bhishma himself was overwhelmed with love and affection. He said, what terrible sufferings and what terrible injustices you good souls have had to endure because you were the sons of Dharma personified. That's actually what happened. They were dharmic. They were people who lived by values, higher values. Higher values are always about trying to elevate others. They are always about trying to help others, trying to do good for others. Whereas the values of adharma are about trying to degrade others, trying to use them, exploit them, take advantage of others, and particularly act against their free will. So you will see this happen when someone's a rapist, when you see it when they're a murderer or a psychopath or a sociopath. This is the kind of behavior you expect from people like that. Such people are evil, not because evil is some two-horned creature that is up there somewhere or out here somewhere trying to play with our minds, but evil is what evil does. Evil means you're acting against the free will of others. It's a simple definition. When you encourage the free will of others. So if I want to take somebody's money, then I steal it, that's evil. But if they give it to me as a gift, there's nothing evil about that. That's their charity, their goodness. If I forcibly have sex with someone, that's rape. Or in the case of a child, abuse. But if that person willingly wants to have sex with someone else, then that is called free will or love or whatever else it might be. But nevertheless, there is nothing illegal about it. So you get to see the point. When you act against the free will of someone, or you cheat them, or you lie to them, or you deceive them, or you, whatever it might be, that becomes adharma. That is evil. So that's what he's saying. You lived by the values of dharma, of goodness, and you suffered greatly. He's empathizing with the Pandavas because that's what they stood for. And Krishna had come to establish dharma because the world had really gotten messed up. There was so much of evil in the world, as we are noticing today, and that is why these teachings are relevant. Because we see the rise of adharma even now, in this world, even at this time, becoming more and more and more and more. And as that happens, that's when Krishna says, I incarnate millennium after millennium to annihilate adharma, or those causing it. to establish the principles of Dharma. And then he turns to Kunti and he says to Kunti, empathizes with how much she suffered when her husband died, leaving her with 5 sons, and then how these sons got into this war and how they caused her great suffering as well. And then he says, with a very philosophical bent of mind, he says, all this is due to inevitable time, under whose control everyone in every planet is carried, just as the clouds are carried by the wind. All this is within the plan of God. So, he's also pointing out something very interesting here, that everyone in every planet, so even if you are in the higher planetary systems, as I was saying earlier, where you live long lives and have beautiful bodies and have so many pleasures, yet you are under the control of time, kala. And that time is under the control of God. So it's not that God does anything directly, but that God is time. Time is a manifestation of God within this world. It does not exist outside this world. It does not exist in the spiritual world, but it exists in the material world, and it is an important factor of the material world. So when he says it's within the plan of God, it's not that God has a written down plan for every single person, as people think. But God has simply invented time. And that time exists out here, and we are under its control. It causes us to age, it causes us to experience many things, and ultimately it causes us to die. So everyone, whether they live in the heavenly planets or here on Earth, which is the middle planetary system, or in the hellish planets, everyone is subject to time and everyone dies. That is the plan. And then he turns to Krishna. Bhishma turns to Krishna and points at him and says, this Sri Krishna is no other than Bhagavan Shakshad. I use the Sanskrit so that those who understand these words may also know that he is not just referring that Krishna is just some incarnation, some highly evolved human or this or that. No, he is Bhagavan, the supreme being. Shakshad means himself. The inconceivable, original, supreme being, the personality of Godhead. He is the first Narayan, Adyo Narayan, Bhishma says, the supreme enjoyer, the Purusha. And he is moving amongst us, just like one of us, and is bewildering us with his Maya energy. He appears just as if he was an ordinary human being moving amongst us. But he is no different. He is the supreme being showing himself to us at this time. And then Bhishma goes on to confirm that not only am I saying this, but Shiva, the great Shiva, the most incredible personality in the entire universe, Narada, Kapila, all of them confirm this. And then he turns to Yudhishthir. Yudhishthir, he was the king now, and the eldest brother of the Pandavas, is the one you thought of as your maternal cousin, dear friend, well-wisher, counselor, benefactor, was none other than the Supreme Being, who is the Paramatma, the great soul, in everyone's heart. Although he is equal to everyone, he has graciously come before me as I am dying and given me darshan, revealed himself to me, stood by me while I'm ending my life, because I am his unflinching devotee. So it's important to understand Bhishma. Bhishma is a great devotee of God. And in that sense, because of his unflinching devotion, he is blessed to be able to see God at the time of death. And you will see by the words he utters now as he is dying, his deep devotion to God and his complete meditation on the divine. That meditation is what brings him moksha, or liberation, or freedom from the cycle of birth and death. And it is that meditation, that unwavering focus on the divine, that leads him out of this karmic bondage. It is a lesson for all of us to learn. If we wish to become free from suffering, this is the path. This is the way being shown by Bhishma. And it is up to us whether we wish to take it or not. We can. Because it is not about our prowess. It is not about how great we are, how evolved we are. It is about kripa, mercy, the blessings of God, How do you win that blessing? How do you get that mercy? Through the act of surrender. What is surrender? Surrender is letting go of your ego. How do you do that? You let go of what you desire. You let go of what you think you are. Two things. You let go of your desires, and you let go of your sense of self. And you place all of that at the feet of God. I surrender myself to you. I am yours. And whatever you wish for me, I happily accept. And you practice this in your life now. You don't wait till the last moment, because when you're at the last moments of your life, you're going to do what you've always done. You're not going to be able to do something different at that time, because your practice, your abhyas, your sadhana has been to be absorbed in your desires, to be absorbed in your ego, to be absorbed in what you think and believe and feel. And that only brings you back to this world again and again and again. It is giving up the attachment to this sense of me and mine that liberates us from this world. So Bhishma continues saying, fulfilling my vow and sacrificing his own promise, he got down from the chariot and took up its wheel and ran towards me hurriedly, just as a lion goes to kill an elephant. Okay, I think I need to show you what we're talking about here. You'll see Bhishma is on his chariot. He's been firing repeated arrows at Arjun. He is almost about to kill Arjun, and because he had taken a vow, he had promised Duryodhan. Bhishma had promised Duryodhan, because see, that he would kill Arjun and the Pandavas on that day. Duryodhan had been accusing Bhishma that, oh, you've got a soft spot for them. You're their grandfather. And although Bhishma, the grandfather, had taken one side and was fighting the other side, he was fighting against the Pandavas and had taken the side of the Kauravas. And Duryodhan, who was the head of the Kauravas, was inciting Bhishma, saying, hey, you're being too soft on them because you're their grandfather and you don't want to kill them, and you're just kind of not quite using the weapons you need to use. And Bhishma, in his little, oh yeah, no, not really, I'm going to show you, said, here are the weapons and this is what I'm going to use, and I am going to kill them tomorrow. So with that in mind, he had entered the battlefield and he was attacking Arjun, and Arjun was being defeated. He would have died. Now Krishna was his chariot driver and he wasn't going to let that happen. And so, realizing that his devotee Arjun was in a huge mess, Krishna ran to protect him. Now Krishna had taken a vow that he would not fight in this battle. He had promised that he would not take up arms. So he picked up something else. Quite not a weapon, but he picked up the wheel of a chariot that had broken. And he picked up that wheel, and with that wheel of the chariot he was coming charging at Bhishma. And that's what Bhishma is saying. He broke his vow for me. And he's so touched by that. So let me kind of read that again now so you can get an idea of how fascinating this was for Bhishma. So Bhishma says, Krishna got down from his chariot, sacrificing his own promise, taking up a wheel of the chariot, and ran toward me hurriedly, just as a lion goes to kill an elephant. On the battlefield he charged me as if angry because of the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows. And he has great pleasure in this fact. He says, may he, Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who awards salvation, be my ultimate destination. At the moment of death, let my ultimate attraction be to Sri Krishna. Those who saw him on the battlefield of Kurukshetra attained their original forms, Svarupam, after death. This is a powerful thing to understand, that during the time of Krishna, he was being attacked by many different asuras, many different very evil spirits and beings. You see, where there is light, you will see there will be an attack by darkness. many of you who are light workers, many of you who are involved in trying to help others, even people who are priests and people who are saintly, even Buddha himself and even Krishna were attacked by all these evil forces. Where there is light, there will definitely be an attack of darkness. You see it, it's like bugs going to the light, right? Moths and other creatures, they all go to the light. But eventually they are destroyed by the light. If you can stand in your power, if you do not dim your light at that time. So here again we see this, that those beings, those people in the battlefield, and those beings who came to attack Krishna during his life were all given moksha, or liberation. Just as a moth going to a flame becomes one with the flame, burns up in the flame and is then destroyed and devastated. In the same way, those who approached Krishna to kill him were given moksha. However you think of God, whether you hate God or you love God, you will be purified by that very thought. This is very powerful to understand. You could, Kans, the great king at that time, hated Krishna, tried everything to kill Krishna, but his hatred elevated him. However you think of God elevates you. It's an important point to understand. And so also, all the soldiers in the battlefield of Kurukshetra received moksha. They were liberated. They went to the light. They were freed from the cycle of birth and death. That is how powerful it is to remember God. Of course, if you remember Him in a positive way, in a loving way, in a heartfelt way, in a place of surrender, then you go to even deeper and deeper places within the spiritual world where you can be in the presence of God and where you can be in His Leela. It's not just about some God sitting on a throne and, ruling people and judging people from right around. No, Krishna's in his planet, enjoying his Leela, dancing, singing, playing, celebrating existence. Because what else would you do, right? If you were God, why would you just be sitting in some boring way? You'd be enjoying existence with all your loved ones. And that's what He came here to show us in his Leela in this earth. Bhishma continued, the personality of Godhead who appears in the mind of the devotee by attentive devotion and meditation and by chanting his name. So different processes he's mentioning here. By attentive devotion, acts of devotion, by meditation, which is in the mind, and by chanting his name. That's why we chant the mantra with God's name. All of these processes, he says, release one from the bondage of karma at the time of quitting the material body. He says, may my Lord, who is four-handed and whose beautifully decorated lotus face with eyes as red as the rising sun, who is smiling, kindly await me at that moment when I quit this material body. May we all have that wish, that as we leave this body, that God is there waiting for us, with eyes as red as the rising sun, smiling, kindly awaiting us as we quit this material body. At that time, Bhishma left his body when the sun was in the northern hemisphere. This period is known by yogis who die at will and attain the transcendental abode. This was also Makar Sankranti, a very auspicious time for one to leave the body. So the yogi actually chooses the time when they will leave their body. And the yogis can even do this while they are in the body, while they are in this life. They can reach any planet in no time without a material vehicle. This would have taken someone who is in a spaceship millions of years at the speed of millions of miles per hour. But the yogi can do it instantly. Go to any planet at any time without any material vehicle. Just simply transport them, teleport themselves there. We all have this capability. This capability is what this ancient Vedic civilization explored and fulfilled and attained during their time. We have become too engrossed in a different technology that makes it impossible for us to travel like this. But they had perfected this. Bhishma then merged himself in the Paramatma, the Supersoul, Sri Krishna, and thus became silent and his breathing stopped. Knowing that Bhishma had merged into the unlimited eternity of the Supreme Absolute, all present there became silent like birds at the end of the day. Deep silence came upon everyone. And then it says these beautiful words, "Thereupon that man who spoke on different subjects with thousands of meanings, who fought on thousands of battlefields and protected thousands of men, stopped speaking. And being completely freed from all bondage, withdrew his mind from everything else and fixed his wide open eyes upon the Supreme Being, the original personality of Godhead, Bhagavan Sri Krishna, who stood before him, four-handed, dressed in yellow garments that glittered and shined. He was at once freed from all material inauspiciousness and was relieved of all bodily pains caused by the wounds of the arrows." With that, we come to the end of chapter 10 of the Bhagavatam, first canto. And I invite you to write your thoughts in the comments, to tell me what you think, what you feel, what you believe, what you understand. I'd love to know. And I encourage you to read the Mahabharata, the Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita, and to enlighten yourself with this great wealth of wisdom that is available to all of us. It is a great blessing to be able to share this with you. I want to let you know that I may be flawed in many, many ways, but these writings are not. They are perfect in every way. And by touching the perfect, the absolute, you too will become awakened, enlightened, and you will reach your spiritual destination just as you desire. That is my hope, my wish, my blessing for you. Thank you so much for being here, and have a wonderful time. Jai Shri Krishna. Hare Krishna.